have really there. But yes, definitely, it's a good way to move if you don't have tracks.
All right, thank you,
All
Nina.
right.
Sorry, Axel. Let's go to Craig.
Yes, thank you. In general, thank you for joining us this evening / afternoon, depending on where you might be. Your time is always greatly appreciated here. I just have a simple question for you that starts off simple but might get complex. So I'll lead with this. If it's one thing that we're seeing, everything that M just mentioned when it comes to combined arms, painting of tanks, any of this stuff, NCOs, what strikes me is that Russia seeks to be this Western style technology driven military. At least that's the premise that they try to push out. But when you get into the meat and the grinding of the sausage, so to speak, their army is not professional. It seems to be much more political than it is professional. And I'm kind of wondering, as a former intelligence officer, when it comes to intelligence, it's not just about counting tanks, counting personnel, counting guns. It's also kind of trying to get into the mind of your opponent and their culture and where they come from. If given Finland's special, quote unquote, its special history with Russia, can you speak to us a little bit about why you see Russia not professionalizing, even though it's relatively near to the West and it tries to emulate the West in terms of its technology, its professionalism is nowhere near that standard. Do you see that as a cultural, kind of birthmark, or do you see that just more in terms of just average corruption and doing what authoritarian governments do?
Yeah, I'd say it's a lot more of the latter one. Russians can, if Russians are properly trained, they can fight, and they can fight well, but they just don't get the proper training. And you have to remember that the Russian Federation's army was built on the old Soviet army, and Soviet army was a communist state. You have a political guidance in everything. The numbers mattered more than the skills. And you really definitely didn't want your people to think too much. In the Soviet army, the division commander, 15,000 soldiers, motorized rifle division commander was the lowest tactical commander who had a possibility to think himself and make his independent decisions. All his subordinates, regimental commanders have to show their plans to the division commanders for approval, and then it went down to the battalion commanders and so on. So they didn't have the mission tactics because you didn't have lieutenants and sergeants who can think with their own brains and take initiative and operate as in the Western democracies we teach them to do. And Soviet Federation, Russian Federation Army was built on that, and to start change that culture takes decades, and you need the totally new generations of officers to take effect. And then Russian Federation had less than 10 years of some kind of freedom, which was more or less chaos, and then Putin took over. And it's been ever since, it's been going more and more to the dictatorship. And as we all know, all dictatorships are corrupt, and they really don't want people to think too much what they are doing. So there was no initiative actually to Russia tried to copy West, but only on let's say on formation. They wanted to have same kind of weapon systems. They wanted to look better. Have a new uniforms, and they look the KSSO, the Russian Special Forces, the only real special force they have, which is directly under the general staff in Moscow. They are carbon copies of the Western Special Forces. Every single detail they try to copy, but they don't copy the spirit. They don't proper the leadership and the values and all that which you need actually to have a force which can operate as our Western armies operate. Mission tactics, much more flexible, much more junior leaders who can take initiative and all that. They just don't do it. And when when we were looking at in the Finnish military intelligence, looking at how they exercised, we saw that it's like in the Soviet times, except that they have fewer troops. There were some initiatives to try to get junior officers, battalion commanders to be more independent, and some tries to introduce the mission tactics, but it really never took wind. It never became culture in that army, and that's one reason why we see in the Finnish Defense Forces. We think that the best way to fight the Russians is to go at their throat. You go to close combat, because we know, after seeing how they exercise, we know that in close combat we beat them every time, especially in the forested areas. Just because our junior leaders can take initiative and they know how to fight better, and the skill level of the troops is much better. So we knew that we can take them in a close combat, and close combat is a good place to be, because there they can't use the enormous artillery when we are fighting them in close range. What we thought was that they traditionally, the Russians have been good in operational level. Basically, the operational art was invented by Russians after First World War. They came first with the maneuver warfare and deep fight and everything like that. Luckily, they have never been able to create an army which could actually conduct the operations that their best brains came up with. But still, we think we were looking how they exercised with big exercises, 150,000, 200,000 troops all the time, regularly. So we thought that, well, they might be pretty good in operations, but it has turned out that they are not. They don't do joint operations. They don't even do single service operations properly. And it seems that all these big exercises have been more or less rehearsed plays, not real, two-sided fluid situation, real training exercises where you put leaders to positions where they have a chance to fail and they have a chance to learn. And that's one problem they seem to have, as in all dictatorships we can see here during this war, that the zero tolerance to mistakes. If you screw up, you're out. You are prosecuted for insubordination or whatever they come up with. If you lose one fight, there's no room for error, which means that nobody dares to do anything because they are afraid of making mistakes. And we all know that only way really to learn to fight the war is to exercise a lot and make a lot of mistakes.
So let me just ask you one question then, as a kind of a wrap up. Why do you think that is? If they played around with this idea, can you try and synthesize and try and help us understand through a Russian mind why a plan like that to delegate forward would not pick up steam in a military that's looking to modernize, right? If you're looking to modernize and get all this new fancy gear and get all these new fancy tanks and get all this cool technology and stuff like that they like to parade around Red Square, why wouldn't the ability to adjust from future armaments to future tactics, because generally those are supposed to go hand in hand, right? You're supposed to, when you update your equipment, the equipment helps you use that stuff better on the battlefield. So I guess maybe I'm looking for an answer that doesn't exist, but why wouldn't those two things move in parallel, I guess, is my question, in that system of quote unquote modernization since the Chechen War?
I think the biggest problem is that in order to actually really develop your capabilities and develop and improve your armed forces, you have to be honest on everything. You have to be honest about your equipment, that, well, actually this doesn't work. And you have to question your tactics and so on, and have very honest discussions. And when you look at dictatorships like Russia is, it's all about saving face, how things look. So if the Minister of Defense have, in their infinite wisdom, have decided to buy this and this kind of tank, and troops can't say that, well, this tank has problems. No, it's an excellent tank. If there's a problem, it's the users, not the tank. And with that attitude, it's difficult to start to do complex operations, operations, because when you look at the air operations, the pilots, the things in Russia is that it's all about how it looks. It's all about numbers. We have conducted this year 3,367 exercises, which is 10% more than last year. Great. Nobody is interested what happened to the exercises. Or our pilots have flown 128 hours, which is 5% more than previous year. Nobody's interested. What are they actually doing with those flight hours? How they are exercising? What's the skill level is? Because that requires honesty. And in that system, it doesn't. It's so thoroughly corrupt system that people who say how things are not approved in that system, so to say. You look at the. I know, for example, that the Russian defense industry has created totally capable, good camouflage nets, thermal netting, and everything. Of course, all copies of Barracuda, but still, I've seen them in affairs. They are good. They would work. I've looked thousands and thousands of pictures from this war, Ukrainian war. I haven't seen a single Russian tank with camouflage net. And I'm trained to T-72. I know that you can't put camouflage net inside that tank. There's no room, no way. It has to be rolled, and that's outside the car. I haven't seen a single camouflage net there. So
because they didn't produce it.
Well, I'm pretty sure that the Minister of Defense have put money to have camouflage nets because everybody understands that you can't go there. So they're probably sailing in the Mediterranean as a yacht or something, because it's just so corrupt. And if you're a platoon leader and so that I don't have camouflage net, even though my civil organization said that I should have 10 camouflage nets, and you go to your company commander and said, hey, where's my camouflage net? That creates problem. Therefore, keep your mouth shut and be happy. Stay in the middle of your clothing and don't ask difficult questions, because nobody likes that. And the thing is that you actually, as a young lieutenant, you want to be a general one day, because if you're a general, you can make a lot of money through corruption, because it's all about how high you can be in the hierarchy. The Minister of Defense, Shoigu, he has a dacha close to the suburbs of Moscow, and they estimate that it's cost 18 million euros to build, and his annual salary is about 120,000 or something like that. So there's something. It's good to be a general, but you don't get there if you ask difficult questions.
Thank you, sir, for this answer. So to answer you, Craig, and to put it to our listeners in a simplified manner, and as an Egyptian, and Egypt used to be a Soviet satellite, and we still suffer from this problem to this day. Military service in certain countries become a highway for social mobility, and the only way for you to do that is to keep your mouth shut, as our esteemed guest has just highlighted. And therefore, there is no opportunity for learning. And therefore, there is no opportunity for asking hard questions. And therefore, there is no opportunity for the leadership to find an opportunity in training young leaders to become leaders, because it's part of coup proofing. They want to protect their seats, and therefore, they don't want the younger generations to understand exactly what's going on. They don't want them to see the truth. There's a lot of corruption going on. There's a lot of grifting going on. There's a lot of money being stolen, so on and so forth. And therefore, even if you have the most brilliant piece of equipment, hypothetically speaking, developed domestically by their own quote-unquote R&D teams, you don't have the human resource to operate. hypothetically speaking, your educational system, as flawed as it is, and your political system, as corrupt as it is, managed to produce an anomaly of a human being that would triumph your case. Still, they don't have enough people on their side to fight whatever fight they want to fight. That's number one. And number two, the sheer amount of incompetence and the sheer amount of corruption and the sheer fear within the upper echelons of that system that wants to coup-proof against any threats against its own seats will prevent those young leaders from asking those hard questions, from learning, from perfecting operating those equipment, and from asking questions so on and so forth to make sure that they fight the good fight, and they don't have a reason to fight the good fight. That's the other problem, is that they don't have something to fight for.
And you have always also have to remember one thing is that in both in Soviet Union and the Russian Federation, the armed forces is a necessity, but it's also a threat, and the leaders are afraid of it. You know, in the Soviet Union times, yes, you need to have a big red army because you have to be able to protect your power. You have to keep your vassals, whether it's a Warsaw Pact or whatever, online and prepared to fight the capitalist West. So you needed a big army. But the army is a threat because the values which normal army has, you know, it's about patriotism, it's about values, honesty, talking the truth and all that. And the danger is that even in a country like Soviet Union, the military may start thinking about that what's actually really cool, what is really actually best for my country and for my people, because they are not political persons. Therefore, that's why in the Soviet Union they have the commissariat system, that you have a political officer in every unit, company level and up, supervising and watching what those officers are doing, because you know the army is the only one of us in the Soviet Union, only one which was powerful enough to topple the government. You know, it was stronger than KGB, stronger than militia, stronger than the internal security forces. So you know, it's something you have to have. And nowadays in the Russian Federation, the thing, it's a bit same thing. You know, the Putin just introduced a couple of years ago kind of a political officer system to the armed forces. It didn't. The program is still running. You know, they haven't been able to fulfill it, but they started it with the same idea that you have to have eyes there to see what the people are doing. And one way to safeguard that the army doesn't do anything that you don't want them to do is, of course, that you select the highest generals not based on their skill level and capabilities, but on their loyalty. You don't want to have a general who thinks too much, is too good in profession, because he probably is also a decent human being and thinks about things, what's good for his people. Therefore, you take the guys who are loyal, not the best ones, and as we can see nowadays.
Thank you so much, sir. Finance, and then Veronica.
Hey, thank you again for being here, sir. I have a question. Sorry that we're on the Russian topic for a moment. I'd like to ask over to the Ukraine side. We were talking a bit about vehicles for them. I know, given that they are doing an impressive job, but also struggling to just make sure they have enough vehicles on the logistics side of things. And we're seeing them go, for lack of a better term, full Mad Max with some of the crazy stuff that they are putting together to get mobility when they don't have the IFVs and tanks that they really should have and need. So I guess my question is, even though they're not getting all the things that we should definitely continue to advocate for them getting, isn't there also just a case for sort of hand the Ukrainians anything that has four wheels or a track and drives? If it has armor, even better. If it has a gun, even better. But like, they seem to be using all of this effectively. Am I understanding correctly their abilities and what I'm seeing on the battlefield? And sort of what along those lines? I mean, I remember, I think might have even been Germany who sent armored Humvees with machine guns on the back that I'm sure they're enjoying right now, etc.
Yes, you know, that's true. If you want to do offensive things, it's always better to ride to the fight than walk to the fight, especially since you have a lot of area to cover, and you don't want to walk under artillery fire too long. So it's better to be maneuverable and fast, even with the light-skinned vehicle. If you don't have anything properly armored, I say that. I've talked with some Ukrainians, military, and they say that they basically start to have amount of armored personal carriers what they need. They don't have the amount of tanks they would want to have. They don't have the quality they want to have. But yes, more is still needed. And one great challenge is the dozens of different types they now have. They have everything. M113s, the old Dutch UPR 765s or whatever they are, old BMPs. It's a Hammers, Bushmasters, whatever. It's a training challenge, but on the other hand, the Ukrainians are pretty handy, and if you driven one armored vehicle, learning to use another one doesn't take that long. The maintenance and logistics must be a nightmare, and I really wouldn't like to be the chief of logistics in the Ukrainian armed forces after this war is gone, because how to take care of this fleet, it's going to be very, very, very challenging. Could we have done better? Our big challenge in Western Europe is that basically every European country has their own defense industry. So we have a lot of different models. You look at the NATO armies. We have half a dozen different main battle tank types and dozens of different infantry fighting vehicle types and so on and so on. So when everybody was giving what they had, either in storage or from their units, you tend to have a huge amount of different types of vehicles, which will be a challenge in the future. Just now they are running, but if this war goes on, the maintenance upkeep of all these vehicles is going to be more and more demanding, and of course you will have wear and tear, and you will have losses, and that's one thing that, even though the situation is now pretty good with APCs, as the Ukrainians say, in a couple of months it's not necessarily as good situation. So we need to continue supporting Ukraine, not only with the new vehicles, but also with the capability to upkeep and maintain them in this war, which will continue. And that's one thing when everybody's been looking at the Russian losses, tank losses. The Oryx makes a great work checking from the open sources and calculating how many vehicles the Russians and guns and tanks Russians have lost. But having been trained to the Russian vehicles, tanks, I know that they are harder to maintain than the Western ones. They require more maintenance than the Western ones. They break up more often than the Western ones. And now that you have a lot of units which been in the field practically all the time for 6 months without proper preventive maintenance, because that's really not one of the Russian fortes, without preventive maintenance, without proper upkeeping, I think that the wear and tear will cause them a lot of losses on top of those that the Ukrainians been destroying. The usability of the whatever vehicle they have left in the Russian army is not that great, and there's been news about that complaints from Russian soldiers that there's in a tank platoon there's only one tank which is actually functioning fully. Others have problems either with the gun or with the chassis and so on. So yes, if you want to wage a war, you better think ahead and you better take care of your maintenance.
Given your experience, very good point, and thank you very much for laying this out for our audience. Now, the key thing, yet again, is the materials. And this came up earlier this morning. We had the discussion already when the first indications came out yesterday. But this wonderful, famous Ringtausch, the merry-go-round backfilling Germany was successfully, obviously, finally getting on the ground, leads, however, to results which are quite astonishing. 28 M55S tanks are now to be given by Slovenia, which are nothing else than the T-55s. Upgraded, yes, our friends from Albert did a bit of work, and the loading system is different, and so on and so forth. And people can talk about the details, but these are still, after all, T-55s. You know these tanks.
Yeah.
You know exactly from which age they are, from which area they are. Why on earth? Why on earth is that happening?
Well, it's probably because it's better than nothing. It's I was a T-55 company commander for many years. They were modernized with the Swedish Bofors fire control system and Belgian Sabot ammunition and a number of other things. But basically, you knew that the tank's armor is so freaking weak that anybody shoots at you, it comes in from the front and it exits from the rear, and it doesn't even slow down on the way. The only way to survive is to shoot far faster and more accurately than the other guy does. Only good thing with that tank was that it was freaking simple. If you have a hammer and some metal wiring, you can fix any problem you have in the tank. But yes, as this, it's a sad situation to send people to war against T-72s and T-80s and T-90s with that kind of vehicle. It's a good in fire support. It kills all the infantry fighting vehicles it meets, but it's tank versus tank or under shot with anti-tank weapons. It's not going to be nice.
Should Ukraine use those other than for civil defense along the Belarusian border?
Well, if you're fighting for your survival and freedom, you use whatever you have. And yes, if you are very, very careful with your tactics, you don't use it as an offensive weapon system in a very front edge of your attack, but you can use it rear for fire support or build up anti-tank traps for possible enemy counterattacks and whatnot. Again, it's better than nothing. 100mm can, I don't know if it's been upgraded, but still, as I said, it kills 90% of the armored targets you can find in the battlefield. It can still penetrate the BMP-2, BMP-1, BMP-3 even, It's not useless.
Thank you for clarifying this. All right, shall we go to Veronica and then Kivistö? We have 4 hands up. If I'm just highlighting this, General, you
Hi,
have a few more
Pekka.
moments for us.
Can
right?
I ask 2 questions?
Sure.
Yeah, I have 2 questions about one in Germany. Why they don't send arms, especially tanks, to Ukraine? What they afraid of? And second, if Russian mobilize whole country, is that work?
Say again, what was the last one? What if?
His question was whether a general mobilization of Russia would help them, would work.
Okay. Well, first of all, Germany. I think that the German political leadership is still suffering from.
Vastaa mun kysymyksiin.
I think that German political leadership is still suffering from trauma, and they have understood that the last 4 decades of their policy towards Soviet Union and Russian Federation, well, let's say Russian Federation, okay, to be fair, last 3 decades, the policy towards Russian Federation has been wrong. They thought that this bilateral or trade between between the countries will create this mutual dependency, which will prevent armed conflicts, and that they can trust Russia, and that they emphasize relations with Russia over the allies in Eastern European allies like Poland and Baltic states and all that. And when all this came down, now they're suffering trauma, and it's difficult to admit to yourself that I was fooled, and I was fooled for so long time. So they still have this appeasement mentality, and they still try to try to explain to themselves that we went totally wrong, and that with Russia we can still have a dialogue as long as we don't make their life too hard. Don't punish them too much. Then they can come back to the negotiation table. They just refuse to see Russia as what it is. It's I don't know. Germany has had this problem. I think that the Americans and the Western allies beat the Germans in the end of the Second World War too badly, so that they lost their backbone totally. And the biggest economical power in Europe should be also quite a big military power, and they should also use both tools to benefit the alliances. They are members in EU and NATO, but they just don't get their act together. I think that we need a totally new generation of politicians in Germany before this things goes to the right track. What comes to the mobilization in Russia, the mobilization in Russia has big problems because they don't have a mobilization system. They like in Finland, when conscript goes to reserve, they go as a units, and these units, we have plans. Everybody, their personal addresses and everything is updated all the time, so that when we send them call them when we mobilize them, we can reach them, arrive to a location where there's a people and units which have been trained to do the mobilization, which receives them, equips them, with personal gear, with the heavy weaponry, and trains them and sends them away. And there's a plans, and this has been exercised for decades. And Russia has nothing like that. So what they have in theory is 2 million reservists, guys who have served done their conscript service or served as a contract soldiers at one point. If they start the mobilization, first the military commissariats will start calling people in, and then they will sort the people which they happen to get in. Who knows how to drive BM-B2? Okay, who can shoot with the gun? Who's been a crew chief in the BM? They try to create some kind of organization from these people whose skill levels and tasking and training they really don't know, and then they need to equip them. And the problem is that they really don't have equipment currently enough. We've seen that they are equipping a lot of the troops with old-fashioned equipment, plus even the new equipment they have is substandard in many ways. There's been complaints about the boots for years that the army boots suck. They don't fit, and they break very fast and so on. We've seen that the protective gear which they are giving the troops really don't work and so on. Then you would need to have a heavy equipment, the unit equipment, tanks and guns and whatnot. And same thing, they don't have it. They have a lot of. They still have thousands of armored vehicles and tanks in depots. They are in bad condition. They are all from 1970s and 80s without any modernization. So equipping the troops would be difficult, and then you have to train them, because most of the reserve, so-called reservists, haven't had any reserve training ever since they left the army, because they don't have. They started to build up this contract reserve system, and they used in the bigger exercises some reserve units they collect every time they just collected them and trained them and used them. But from those 2 million, less than 10%, I'd say, that have had any military training after they left the army. So to have a proper military force through mobilization would take 6 months minimum, in my opinion. They don't have the time, they don't have the equipment. And then there's a political issue that when you start calling people to service in Moscow and St. Petersburg, you can take a 20-year-old guy in Dagestan who's always been the bullied and kicked around, and you can send him to war. But you send a mobilization order to a 30-year-old reservist in Moscow, Russian, who has a life, he has a work, he has a family, and he knows what kind of meat grinder is waiting in Ukraine. He probably throws that order to trash, or he takes a bunch of stack of money and goes to the commissariat and buys himself out of the service. And if that happens in a large amount, then you have to send the MPs and police to hunt them down and force them to service. And then you have a political problem, because people, when in anything that happens in Russia, the Moscow and St. Petersburg are most important cities, and if people there start to be annoyed and against government, that when their loved ones are forced to join, that's a political problem. It's an economical problem, because you're losing your best workforce, and they have, in many fields, they have a huge lack of professional workforce. So it's an economical problem. And then, yes, you have, this 30-year-old reservist who have forced to service. What's their motivation? And do you really want to arm them in a dictatorship? There's things like that. Why I don't think that full mobilization will happen. They will do probably partial mobilization. They try to find some people which they can coerce to mobilize, but that the full 2 million would be mobilized. Not going to happen, because they can't even equip them. What would they do with them in any case?
Or train them, for that matter, right?
That's a good question, and that's a good point, because yes, they don't have a training force. You take any Russian brigade which had they didn't have the full brigade. They had the two battalion task forces. They were sent to war. When they were beaten very badly, then they collected third one from all the remaining personnel around and equipment around in the garrison. They sent the third battalion for most of the brigades. So what's left in those brigade garrisons is very few equipment, very few officers and NCOs to train anybody. So yes, exactly. Who's going to train these reservists?
All right.
Yeah, well, and on that happy note, sorry, but should we go to Veronica, who simply got passed over before because I didn't moderate appropriately? Veronica, please.
Hi, good evening from Stockholm. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good, thank you. Thank you so much for this space. And Pekka, thank you for coming to MriyaReport. It's been really interesting to listen to you. I wanted to ask your opinion about something I read today. We have this Swedish blogger. The blog is called Cornucopia, and I'm sure that all the Swedish listeners know exactly what blog I'm talking about. The author kind of had this interesting idea today. It's just a speculation. It's about these the referendums that are supposed to be held this next weekend in Luhansk and Donetsk. And the thought goes like this: that what if, assuming that the Kremlin and Putin doesn't want mobilization, what if they want a way out? What if these referendums are not supposed to end up in the people voting for to become a part of the Russian Federation? What if they're supposed to that the result is supposed to be no? that they don't want to, because that might give Putin a reason to pull out, to say, well, they're thanking us very much for helping them with the denazification of their area, but now they want to keep on their own. Or maybe even I'm thinking that you could even put the blame on the local administration, the local leaders, and say that they just lured us into this. They backstabbed us, so now they get to sort it out by themselves. Is that? I'm not. I don't think this is going to happen, but I think it was kind of an interesting idea.
Yeah,
So
it
what do you
is.
think?
Yeah, it is. It is really interesting idea, because on the other hand, allowing this to happen, or deciding that this will be the end of the referendum, because we all know how the referendums go in Russia, that how they are decided beforehand. It would be, of course, a huge loss of face for Putin, that we've been waging war with Ukraine since 2014 for these people, and protect Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast and its Russian population. And now they say that they don't want even to be a part of the country. That would be a huge loss of face, but it's always a but in dictatorships, because in the dictatorships the most important thing is to find a blame. Somebody have to be a scapegoat. Somebody have to be accused for what has happened. Yeah, and it's not the boss. It's not the president. It's somebody else who has screwed up. So yes, it could be one way to push the blame to other people. But I don't think I don't think that that's going to happen. I don't believe it. I believe that Putin is living in his own bubble. He's still determined that Ukraine have to cease as an independent nation, and it have to be crushed. And they need to take parts of Ukraine, the Novorossiya, that's it, and annex that part, and let left a small vassal state run by some Putin's subordinate, and that's that. I don't think that he has given up on that problem. But on the other hand, we've seen great things happen. But it's possible, not probable, but interesting.
Would you allow us? We have 4 more hands up. We have 3 Finnish questions and 1 American question. Would you allow us?
Well, okay, if we take those, then I have to get out.
Of course. Much appreciated, and thank you for your for spending so much time with us. It's very much appreciated. We'll start with Dryfly, then we go to Miko, Antti, and the last question comes from Nina. Dryfly.
Hello, very, very good discussion. Love to hear voices from that part of the world. My question is, I've always believed, first of all, I've always believed that the war would not end until there was mobilization. I've been saying that since March. And the reason I say that is that until the Russian middle class starts feeling the threat and pain of war, there's just not going to be sufficient pressure on the elites to come to a conclusion that satisfies Ukraine. So in that respect, while it's troubling to see these events, in my estimation, I think we're getting closer to a solution. Do you share that belief, or do you think I'm crazy and overly optimistic? And I'll listen.
I have said that I agree with you. Putin is still afraid of people, and making the war too painful could cause problems. In Russia, people have practically never changed the government. Never. It's always been a palace coup, kind of. The Great October Revolution. It wasn't the Great October Revolution. It was a couple thousand Bolsheviks, which basically did coup in St. Petersburg, and that's that. They don't have that that tradition. But when 2011 they had the demonstrations in Moscow, that really scared Putin. After that, he started to build the Russian Guard, National Guard, 340,000 soldiers who are specially trained to crowd control with machine guns if needed. He's afraid of people, and I think that's one biggest reason that there's no declaration of war, there's no mobilization. Not even the economy is not in a war footing yet, because he's afraid. But if he's desperate enough, he might then try that if nothing else works. And I agree that could cause a reaction from the Russian population.
Thank you for that. Antti. Oh, sorry, Mikko. Apologies. Mikko, please go.
Thanks, Axel. And actually, question to Herra Kenraali. Have you seen anything or heard anything about T-14 Armata regarding Ukrainian battlefield? I've seen it in past years only breaking down in the victory parade in Red Square in Moscow, but now no evidence of any kind of battle action.
I said that the T-14, one of my favorites. I have written a couple of articles about it. It's a typical Putin's wonder weapon. There's nothing new in it, actually. It's the concept of having a remote control turret on the tank is an American concept from 1960s. All the weapon systems and other systems in that tank, they are basically old Soviet systems which they have maybe improved a bit. For example, the famous Afghanite active protection system is actually the old Soviet Zor system which they tested in Afghanistan in 1980s, and they now just have tweaked it a bit. So nothing new there. And a lot of propaganda, that talks about how it has radar so that it can see and follow 100 air target in 100 till 150 kilometers is physically impossible with antennas they have in the tank. Plus, it's physically impossible to have the computing power to do all that in that tank. It's all a lot of hoopla, little real capability, and it's expensive. The Russian military don't want to have it. It costs 3 times the price of a T-90M. They would much rather have T-90Ms or something like that than Armatas. But since it was once again a typical Russian Putin's favorite project, something like that looks good, can be used to scare those who don't understand too much about the real capabilities it has. Plus, it's expensive, therefore it creates great possibilities to corruption and stealing money. And 2015 Victory Day parade, when it was introduced in Moscow, they told that by 2020 we will have 2,300 T-14 Armatas in Russian armed forces. And now we are living end of 2022, and they have about 20 prototypes which are still should be in troop testing somewhere in Russia. Probably not. So it's yes, wonder weapon. It's not a real operational capability. It doesn't offer anything that is revolutionary and would change the armored battle in any way. And I would any day take Leopard 2A6 and go against Armata and laugh on my way. Yeah.
Well, that's the spirit, sir. Let's go to Nina and then Antti.
Antti, go ahead before me. I will have the last question, please.
Sure, shoot, Antti.
Roger. So, though I will not shoot, but so, General, with all of your experience in training Finnish armored conscripts and armored warfare in general, we've had this recurring issue come up on the space that whenever there is a advanced kit that is being discussed that the Ukrainians should have, there's always the comeback that, oh, it's Western gear, it's complicated, it will take time, and there's all sorts of issues with training. So from your point of view, if you take a Ukrainian tank crew that is already combat hardened and its motivation is beyond question, how long do you think it would take for a Ukrainian tank crew that's acclimatized up to the hilt with Russian-style armor to train them to be effective with, let's say, Leopard 2s?
Well, I'd say that armored warfare is not that difficult. That's why I became a tanker. I'm a simple guy. I want to do simple things. It's easier to have a tank company, full caliber shooting than having an infantry squad doing the same shooting because with tanks you can see everybody what they're doing. You can see where the turret turns. You can control everything. And the tank, when you talk about training tanks, the crews, when we acquired T-72s in 1985, the Russians said that you can't train conscript to use the T-72 under 2 years. And we said, well, we have the system already. We do it in 11 months. And we did it, and no problem. And when you look at tank crew training, and you take a conscript who has never seen a tank, you have the basic training 2 months, which is just to learn the soldier skills, which is same to anybody in all the services and all the branches in the Finnish defense forces. And after that starts tank training. And that takes the basic course for a guy who never seen a tank is 3 months. In 3 months, we train them to use the tank, to maintain the tank, operate as a tank crew, so that it can safely shoot with all weapon systems and drive the tank in the public roads and whatnot. And after that, the rest of the training, the 7 months of the service time, goes to tactical training. Then you learn to fight. The first 3 months is just the technical part, how to run the tank and how operate the different systems of the tank as tank crew. And then 7 months is used to learn to fight as a tank crew, tank platoon, tank company, part of the battalion. And that takes time, and that takes practice a lot. So when you have a tank crew, if you have a seasoned Ukrainian tank crew who knows all about the fighting, they even have been in war and fought the tanks. There, the tactics is not that demanding. You just have to teach them the tank, how to operate the tank. And again, the Western tanks are much more easier to use and maintain than the Russian equipment. And in Finnish Defense Forces, if you have a guy who has a tank license already, he knows the basic about operating a tank. And if you have to change another tank, it's 2 month course, and then you are good to go with the new type of tank. So 2 months is plenty of time in the wartime when you can work much longer hours and you don't have to take weekends off and all that. I'd say that in 4 to 6 weeks, I could take a Russian Ukrainian tank crew and 4 to 6 weeks they could operate Leopard pretty well. 2 months they would be good, So it's not that difficult. What takes time is then to train the mechanics to keep the tank up and running. That's the main maintenance and upkeep that requires more from the mechanics, from the logistic units, from the industry, and that takes a longer time, and build up the system takes long. But training a tank crew to fight a Western tank, easy.
Thank you so much, sir. Iske ja murra.
Iske ja murra.
All right, let's go to Nina.
Thank you, Pekka, so much for giving so much time and sharing your knowledge here. And because war is a very hard thing, and we are discussing like really many times like really disturbing things. Also, I would like to share some levity in this group, which we also do sometimes. So if you would agree to tell about this crazy story, what you told me about your when you went to the Russian side with Etyji. Thank you.
Okay, well, yeah, it's we were living in 2009, and the Russians had the Zapad 2009 exercise close to Finnish borders too. And I was serving in the Finnish Defense Command J5, and we made a decision that we knew that Russians were exercising up north in Kola Peninsula, in the city of Petsenga. There's 200th Motorized Rifle Brigade there, and we decided to make a OSCE inspection there, to using this transparency system we had, so that we announced that okay, we want to see the brigade. And the OSCE regulations said that time that the brigade can be inspected, or the unit you want to inspect, the host have to answer in 48 hours whether they accept the visit, and then the unit can be inspected either in the garrison or in the field. And the Russians announced that, well, yes, this is good to go. You are welcome. The brigade is in garrison, ready for inspection. Good. And we had I was a team leader. I had two captains with me. We flew to St. Petersburg. There was six Russian officers free from the Leningrad military district HQ and free from the army HQ in Moscow. And they said that this is our protocol. We fly to Kola Peninsula with the military flight, and then stay overnight in Petsenga, and tomorrow we inspect the brigade. It's in garrison waiting for inspection. That's great. Agenda approved. We went to this, was it a Levoto or some other military airfield close to St. Petersburg, and there was an AN-76 plane waiting for us. It's a small Russian transport plane. Looks like a Mickey Mouse because the engines are in the top of the wings. And then the host said that we have to wait a little because they have to refuel the plane. But okay. And after a while, a lorry came, looked like 1950s Bedford. It had a fuel tank on top of it. And it stopped next to the plane, and two Russian conscripts dismounted and reported the captain. And the pilot took a little kettle, and he took some kerosene from the tank to that kettle, and he looked at it, and he smelled it, and finally he tasted it. And I asked the co-pilot, what the hell is going on here? And the co-pilot said that, well, the mechanics, they steal the fuel and put water in place. So the pilot is not checking that there's enough fuel so that we can fly. Okay. And up we went, flew to Kola Peninsula, no problem. Alakurtti, and then took a long bus ride to Petsenga, with this terrible city, looks like 1950s. Built in 1950s and never maintained afterwards. And next morning we went to the brigade HQ, and there was a brigade chief of staff waiting for us and telling that, great, welcome to the 200 Motorized Rifle Brigade. Agenda is that we will give you briefings, then we will visit the brigade museum, then we will have a lunch, and then we will inspect the brigade. Brigade is in garrison ready for inspection. That's great, approved, let's do it. At the briefings, then we went to the brigade museum, where they told how the 200s and its predecessing units have saved the whole Northern Europe from the Nazis and And after that, very long, very wet, heavy lunch. And finally, the Russian colonel, who had at that point drunk at least 2 bottles of vodka, pushed himself up and said that brigade is in an exercise, that the garrison is empty, there's nothing for you to see, go home. And I was like, well, you guys really don't get this transparency thing we are doing here, right? And then I said, well, anyway, I want to see the garrison anyway. And they were, and then we went around in this empty garrison, seeing and learning a lot of things. But it was interesting because we knew already when we left that the brigade is not going to be in the garrison. So, and I think that the Russians knew that we knew. So it's the play you do sometimes with Russians that they lie outright, and they know that the other one knows that they are lying, but nobody cares. But yeah, and it told so much about Russian army and the whole episode with testing the jet fuel, that it's enough fuel in with all that water so that you can still fly. It's one of the real problems they have. It was 2009, and the corruption has gone worse ever since. A couple of years ago, the Russian General Prosecutor Office estimated that 20% of the defense budget is stolen, and we were thinking in the Finnish military intelligence that it must be more. And now there's estimates that it has been 40%, which sounds more appropriate to the considering what the results they have gotten with that money. But it's the war is going on. It's going worse, and it's almost, well, comical, but at the same time terrible, seeing that the developments that's happening in Russia, how they in many cases they sound like Germany going down in 1945. They have now because Putin doesn't trust the military anymore. They have betrayed him. He's bypassing the chain of command, the Minister of Defense and General Gerasimov, and calling directly to the operational commanders out in the field, like Hitler did. Now they are creating these new forces because they can trust the army. So they have these volunteers with the regions are putting up these volunteer battalions, and they are equipped with the best equipment. The Third Army Corps they created in a couple of months from guys who most of them had no proper military training. They gave them T90s and BMP-3s and best equipment. It doesn't make any sense, and that's exactly what Hitler was doing. He didn't trust Wehrmacht, so the best equipment went to SS troops, which were quite often elite troops, but there were some SS units which really had some political officers running them, and they really weren't that good.
And they had the highest loss rate. They had the highest loss rate because they were badly led, badly trained, and thrown into battles which made no sense.
Yeah, and Hermann Göring one point decided that he knows how to do the land battle, so he started to create these Luftwaffe land divisions led by Air Force officers, and they were given the best equipment, Leopard Tiger tanks and 88 millimeter anti-aircraft guns and whatnot. Crazy, and now doing exactly the same. The Russian National Guard is now creating an internal security forces, have been starting to recruit more people because they are taking more part in the combat, and they are getting heavier weapon to do the combat. The Wagner, Putin's cook and his prisoners, they are equipped. More and more these private armies or new units which have nothing to do with the warfighting and army, but the resources go there of personal equipment because Putin trusts these people more than he trusts his generals. It smells a lot like Germany 45, what they are doing.
Downfall.
Yep. But it's been really interesting. Thank you very much for your patience and great questions and great discussions. It's been fun.
No, thank you so much, sir, for your time and your expertise and your insight and your patience and your just sharing everything that you have been thinking with us. It's been amazing. You've made everyone's day on here.
Oh, I hope so. Okay. Have a good evening.
Kiitos. Thank you so much. Now, gentle people, I think this merits a good round of applause. We're extremely privileged that Pekka Tovari took a tremendous amount of time and helped bring more clarity to those issues and straightforwardness, careful, balanced, calm analysis. That is exactly what MriyaReport should bring to bear. And this is why we're here. We want to make sure that there is information awareness, clarity, good discussion, and thank you to the whole audience for all your great questions. It was much appreciated. And with that, Finance M, take it away, because there is something happening whilst Vladimir Vladimirovich and Mr. Shoigu are currently screening their pre-recorded speeches. What has happened today in the US Congress?
So I'm actually totally thrilled because I've been hearing in back channels that members of the Treasury were looking at different ways to actually seize, not just freeze, the Russian assets that are sitting with the Treasury, all 340 billion of them. But it turns out there was a report to Congress today where a gentleman in the I believe it's our Treasury stood up and said that in response to the BS referendums, I don't have any other words for them, he was suggesting that they seize, not freeze, seize some of these Russian assets and hand them over to the Ukrainians. I believe the current suggestion was for 40 billion, and that was to offset something having to do with how much the U.S. was considering sending in financial aid or something. Either way, it does put us down the track and having legal maneuvers on seizing assets, and it's absolutely heading in the right direction. I keep saying repeatedly that there's a nice, simple solution to the current economic issues the Ukrainians are facing, because, quite frankly, in total terms, it's not that large. It's in fact smaller than all those seized Russian assets. If you can't find a legal way to seize your amazing seize someone's assets when they're committing genocide, I don't know when you can find a legal way to seize someone's assets, because that's about as bad as it gets. So that was the amazing news out of the U.S. today. So something I was just hearing on like back channel rumors is now like actual Treasury people standing in front of the Congress asking for it to happen, which that's about as good as it gets in my neck of the woods. Anti, then M. Anti.
Wait, not so quick. Wait, Finance. Where did this topic come up and where was it discussed? Sunday lunchtime, 1 p.m.?
I believe it was originally discussed here on the MriyaReport panel. Although, to be fair, this topic has come up here previously, and we also discussed it last week randomly at some point in time. Sorry, I'm on too much to remember every single time we discuss things. But it was discussed last week, and we discussed this exact topic on Sunday, every Sunday at, I believe, 1 p.m. Kyiv time. I think we're moving that around a little bit because the U.S. audience apparently doesn't like to wake up early in the morning. So we're moving it back a little bit, but it was 1 p.m. Kyiv time, I believe, this Sunday. We were discussing on our weekly Ukraine and Russia economic panel. Now, you good, Axel? Can I go to our hands? All right. Antti, your hand went first, then M.
Yeah, I just it's difficult to fathom how even after 6 and 7 months of being listening to this space and being here, it still sometimes blows my mind how great guests we can get here, and the level of conversation here, it's out of this world. So thank you so much to everyone who keeps coming here day in, day out, the moderators, everyone in the audience. I mean, this space is just fantastic. Thank you so much. That's what I wanted to say.
All right. Thank you very much, Antti. M.
Well, thank you, Finance. Thank you, Antti. It's our listeners who make this happen. And it's the people who work day in and day out to understand what's going on and bring you the most recent information that make it happen. It's also the people working behind the scenes to make sure that we have our esteemed guests joining us day in and day out, sharing with you their time, their insights, their analysis, their sense of humor, and their perseverance as well that make it happen. So it's a collective effort. It's hundreds, sometimes thousands of human beings coming together to learn, to make a difference.